I am going to turn it over to Ben Reed. Ben is going to lead us in a prayer before we get started, and then I'll introduce our first speaker.
All right, let's pray. Father, we gather together today to learn. All of us in this room are sad that we live in a kind of a day where we have to even do these kind of things, but that is the reality in which we live. And so today, as we come together as the body of Christ, we ask that you would lead us, that you would open our hearts and our minds, that you would give us the ability to absorb what it is that is being taught to us, that you would give us wisdom and discernment and guidance to know how to implement this at each of our own churches. We're happy for the opportunity to come together as a community of faith, and we just acknowledge you in all things today, and we ask you to be with us. And at the end of the day, we pray that everything we've said and done will have given you glory and exalted you and lifted you up. So be with us today, and we thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.
Okay, our first speaker today I have known since he was 1 day old. He's my brother. If you can't look around the room and figure out who that person is, well, we do have a nice optometrist place here in town. But my brother, David Stidham, he has recently left the Dallas County DA's office. He is currently the director of licensing for RightNow Media, a parachurch organization. If you don't know what RightNow Media is, go Google it later. You'll thank yourself. But he's going to be talking to us about some different situations, legal considerations that we have to have. So I know he is my brother, so please give him the benefit of the doubt. David Stidham.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. It is an honor to be here. It was just mentioned, it's unfortunate that we do have to be here. So I want to thank y'all for coming, for taking this seriously, for kind of understanding and knowing what is at stake. And before we start, Snyder's a special place to me, not only where my brother's from. As a prosecutor, the first person ever sent to prison is living with y'all over the Brocado unit. So this is a special place for me. We'll be funking there for the next decade, so you're welcome. As I go through my presentation, my job is not to scare you. However, as I talk, it's likely going to scare you. That's not my job. That's not my goal. I want to make you aware of things and liabilities and potential liabilities on your property throughout your ministry, and then through the implementation of a security team, which the law has now given the authority to do. Doesn't mean it's wise, but you have the authority. When my wife and I moved to Boston, I went to law school up in Boston. We went to 5 or 6 apartments, and we were looking at them, and we'd go around and get an understanding, we'd like them, and we'd say, oh yeah, how much does it cost to live here? And they'd say, well, what do you do? Well, I'm a law student. Oh, we don't rent to law students. What? How's that possible? So, kind of what I just told you, you're going to start seeing these liabilities everywhere, and that's okay. That's what I want you to do. I'm not going to have time to get into the details that I want with each of these topics. We're going to hit these at a 30,000-foot view. We're going to go breakneck speed. So if you do have questions about something or want me to further explain something, raise your hand, catch me afterwards, whatever you think would be appropriate. Write your questions down. I'm okay with however you would like to do that, because there are going to be some complex terms, theories here of law, and I want to do it justice by giving you the takeaway, the so what, without bogging you down in the mechanics of how you get there. However, happy to explain further. So, and let me put a couple more caveats. I'm going to be approaching this from a legal standpoint, a law overview. Jeff and his team are going to be more of the hands-on, kind of on-the-ground operations. We may say things that differ, and that's okay. However, if you have a question or want clarification on one of those things and what that means, let us know. However, just remember the lens that I am looking through as I'm talking. Keep that in mind. Hopefully that will help clarify some things. One other thing, I am not your attorney. This is not legal advice. And I say that because that is vitally important to everything I'm going to say. Again, I don't have time to address the needs and get to the specifics of every possible thing. If something I say triggers something for you, you need to find an attorney. I'm going to give you my contact information. Like I said, I'm happy to answer follow-up questions and do whatever can to help y'all, but I'm not your attorney. I just want to make sure that is clear. And with that, we can go ahead and get started. So what we're going to do, there are 4 topics that we're going to cover. General liability, a church's duty, how to protect your church, and questions. Duty is just a fancy legalese for obligations. It's usually something you have to do, a proactive step you have to take. If you're taking notes, these are going to be the 4 main categories, I guess. Everything is going to kind of flow out of these. So just a way to help you organize all of your note-taking. And I'll leave that up there for just a second while you write that down. These will come back up later. You'll notice them up at the top of the slide will kind of help you understand where we are. So I'm going to go through general liability, and these are things that you should know as a pastor, as a person in worship, as someone leading a church. And the first one that we're going to talk about is called vicarious liability. Again, don't be really so confused and concerned with what it's called. That's more to help me. This is a legal doctrine that holds certain parties liable for the actions of others. This is often referred to as an employer-employee relationship. Is anyone familiar with this? That you can be held responsible as a church or a organization, a business, for the actions of someone else. Okay, let me give you a hypo, or actually let me make this relevant for you. Why does it carry? You said employer-employee. I only have one person at my church that is going to be, on payroll, so everyone else is a volunteer. Well, guess what? This includes and applies to volunteers. So that's why this is going to be relevant for every one of you. An employer is responsible for the negligent conduct and the actions of an employee acting within the scope of their job. I'm going to repeat that for you. An employer is responsible for the negligent actions of an employee acting within the scope of their employment. I'm also going to give you the converse to that. An employer is not responsible for the actions of an employee not acting within the scope of their employment. Let me give you an example. So your Sunday school teachers, your ministers, your greeters, your security team we're going to talk about later, anything that they do that is negligent, and we're not really going to define that, it's kind of a reckless conduct, within the scope of the task that you have given them, a church can be liable. Let me give you another example real quick. If you go to Home Depot, and there's a forklift guy delivering a load of lumber, he's going to put it up on the highest shelf. 16-year-old kid, he's excited, he just got a new job. He's got his phone out, he's texting around. Well, he runs into you, he hurts you somehow. Why would you sue the 16-year-old? Let's just think through this real quick. You're ahead of him. He said he doesn't have any money, but why would you sue the 16-year-old? Maybe because he hurt you? Yeah. So he's responsible for the fault. However, why would you want to sue Home Depot? I heard it up here. They've got the deep pockets. They've got the money. So this is kind of the thing that you need to start thinking about. So if you're a Sunday school teacher or your greeter, you say your greeter punches someone as they walk in, that may not necessarily be a negligent action, but I just want you to start thinking about this. If they're acting within the scope of what you have given them and their tasks and authorities, you could potentially be liable. I'm going to say the word potentially because this is going to be a very direct and intense review that you would need to undergo. Again, theories that I just want you to be aware of. I don't know if y'all have heard this week or not, but this is just what I said. I apologize for that. The employer is responsible for the negligent actions. A hypothetical question, or really just, we're going to use a real life example. Who here has heard of Andy Savage? Yeah, if y'all don't know, I'm going to fill you in. I'm going to go fast here. Andy Savage was a youth minister on staff at a church down in the Woodlands in 1998. During his time, again, as a staff member, he had a sexual encounter with a girl that was in his youth group. She was 17, so she is an adult. I don't want to get into the details of what happened, but let's just say that it really wasn't consensual, and it was an awful thing. What had happened from that time He told, actually, I don't know if he told his church leaders or not, but the girl did. The victim in this case went to the church leaders and told the story. Well, they kind of, and I'm going to use this, they swept it under the rug. They said, hey, look, we're going to take care of it. Mr. Savage is no longer going to be on staff. It's going to go away. It's okay, and you probably enjoyed it. You may have liked it, so we're not really going to, I don't think anything really happened. You're both at fault here. Was kind of the gist that the story that I read kind of give the impression of. So anyway, we fast forward 20 years to this past week, and this story breaks. His accuser sent him an email over Christmas and said, remember me? She hadn't forgotten. Andy's statement was, hey, I thought that was dealt with over 20 years ago. And again, I want to be clear, very likely a criminal act occurred here. So now you start looking 20 years later, what is the potential liability? How about the church that is still in existence down in the Woodlands that negligently, I would say negligently handled this way back when? Now, to kind of put another curveball in, the church that hired him in Memphis, where he currently is, this is the teaching pastor, this is like second in command at a massive church in Memphis. The lead pastor said, hey, we support Andy. He messed up. Andy told me at my interview, or at his interview, everything that happened. So now you have another church that has hired someone knowing what has happened. Is there potential liability there? Absolutely. Now, keep an eye on this story. I don't know all the details. We're going to see over the next few months, but this is just an example of something 20 years later that is now coming back to bite people. And it's to be determined. Stay posted. However, what this does is this leads us into direct liability. Like I said, don't really worry about the heading so much, but this is something that an employer's actions or omissions directly cause a harm to someone else. And this is exactly what we just talked about. You also can't escape liability by delegating unlawful or negligent conduct. I'm going to give you a very clear example. If my brother puts a hit out on me for me to die, for a hitman to come take me out, my brother can't escape liability because he said, no, I didn't do it. I didn't pull the trigger.
I haven't done that, by the way.
Yeah, so as far as I know, he's but that is an example of if you see something, you can't say to one of your volunteers or one of the people leading one of your ministries, hey, you go do this, I'm going to turn my back and go the other way. This theory here holds you liable for that as well. And here's how it really applies. Negligent hiring and appointment. Again, this applies to volunteers. So in the Andy Savage example that I just gave you, his church in Memphis, apparently they had full knowledge of everything that had happened before they hired him. So now you're starting to see how this comes together full circle. The brass tacks of this is you fail to identify or ignore a potential liability in hiring employees or appointing volunteers that a reasonably prudent person would or should have seen through the course of their due diligence. So let me break this down for you. This requires you as a church leader or anyone in business to do some work on the front end. So through the course of, let's say, an application process or a criminal background check, we'll talk more about that later, something should have come up that you should have noticed. Let me give you an example. How about a convicted sex offender that is now running your nursery? Just volunteered, you didn't do any work. Sound like a good idea? How about a convicted felon with an aggravated assault with a deadly weapon running your security team? Again, these are things that would have been noticed had you done your work up front. So this is what this theory does and how it holds you liable. Are you doing background checks for your volunteers? And again, I know this may sound crazy to you, but remember how I'm looking at this. I'm not really speaking in reality. I know the reality is much different. However, to protect yourself from liability, these are things that you should be doing. Background checks. How closely are you looking at the results of those background checks if you're doing them? Are you looking at them? Are the church leaders looking at them? Are the elders? Or are you just delegating this to someone and saying, yeah, just look at them? Because remember, you can't get away from negligent conduct by delegating a responsibility that's on you. If you're not, you should have started yesterday. It's just something to be aware of. And again, it doesn't have to be formal. It doesn't have to be like you're applying for a job, and you need to find out about these people. You need to ask questions. And that's okay. As a church leader, you're called on to do that. And I'm going to show you legally kind of why that's important later, if you're not already seeing that. Negligent retention. So this is slightly different. This assumes that the church actually did their job up front. You asked the questions, you had the information. However, at some point during that employment or the volunteer stint while they were working in that capacity, you get information that would make retaining them negligent. So let's use the example of Andy Savage again. His church and all the members in the world is now aware of everything that has happened. Now, is it smart for them to keep him on in paid ministry, as a paid vocational minister, which, by the way, his platform really is a lot about sexual purity? I don't know. I don't have that answer. But this is, again, the context that this will become a reality for you in your ministry. Things to think about. Something more realistic, again, while employed, you find out that the person running your nursery, your youth minister, was charged with a sexual assault. Same thing. If somebody on your security team is charged with a violent weapons offense, at that point, this seems obvious, you would terminate what they're doing. Whether it's paid or volunteer, they need to go somewhere else. Negligent supervision, and this could be one that is probably going to be the most relevant to you. You fail to properly supervise a church activity or a ministry. And again, a born-again Christian that is leading the ministry, the nursery, that is a registered sex offender. Is that the best way for them to use their talents based on their past? No, I mean, absolutely not. This can be a huge area of potential liability for youth groups and church ministers. This can also apply to sporting activities. Any events that you're going to be doing, it can apply to children running around the baptistry, having access to a kitchen, a hot pot of coffee, those types of things. So think more just really within the operations of your church. How about tackle football? How about youth group getting out there and roughhousing around? Hazardous activities. Y'all are living much closer to the mountains than I do, and I'm jealous of that. But if you go on a ski trip, icy roads, things like that, these are incredibly hazardous activities that could lead to liability for your church. So you need to be smart. You need to, and again, I think this is probably one of the ones where you're most at risk of seeing potential liability. And again, the reality is, if somebody gets hurt playing football, they're probably not going to sue you. But I just want you to think, how can I make this better? How can we supervise these things better? How can we help prevent against these types of harms? I'm going to pause right here because I'm about to change gears. Are there any questions about anything I've said thus far? Yes?
Good question. Okay, so you mentioned icy roads like on a ski trip. You know, we know that the weather's going to be bad. We know that it's going to be snowy. It's going to be dangerous to drive. You could be liable if you have an accident in that situation. What about church closings for weather? We had one recently.
Absolutely, same thing. If your parking lot's icy, you think it's a good idea to bring people onto an icy parking lot? And no, we're talking about church property here. I'm not talking about the roads. If somebody wants to get on and drive on the road, that's their own fault. However, yeah, that's a great example. Keeping your church open on a day where you know your property and your premise may not be the best for everyone to come and be on. Consider that. If it's not, it's all on the sidewalk. Take precautions, take the actions on the front to help avoid that if you are actually going to go ahead and go through. Put cones out. Rope off areas that you see that are especially slippery, dangerous, icy, those types of things. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
You give the word charge. If the guy accused of doing something, he goes to the court system and he's adjudicated or he's not guilty, the church will allow him because he was charged?
It's a great question. Andy Savage is not, he's not convicted. And I think, again, you're right, you're innocent until proven guilty. However, from a liability perspective, you're talking under civil law. So this is not criminal law. Liability can attach a lot earlier. The standard is a lot lower. So it's just something to think about. I cannot answer that question, but you need to be aware of it. Maybe at that point you put someone else that's their shadow along, just to help avoid those things. Any other questions? Okay. We're going to talk about premise liability. This is a theory that holds a property owner liable for harm that occurs on their property. We've already talked about this, but now we're going to start diving down. I'm sure y'all are aware of this. I mean, this is kind of common sense. You slip and fall at Taco Bell, I can sue Taco Bell because they potentially didn't do something. Is a property owner liable for all harm that is caused on their property? It's a question to y'all. What do you think? Yes. Yes, probably is. A lawyer's favorite answer. It depends. Probably not, though. Let me see. What it's going to depend on is the type of visitor that they are. I don't know what you're thinking. What does that mean? There are three under the law. There are three legal categories of how people arrive on your property. We're going to talk about two here. And I'm going to go into great detail here, but again, in the law, words matter. I can't stress that enough, so just bear with me as we go through this. An invitee. An invitee is basically someone that comes on a property for a mutual benefit. So think of a church, think of a restaurant, think of a movie theater, a grocery store. You're there to get one thing, the property owner is going to receive a benefit from having you there, money. A church is, their guests and members are considered invitees. Just like a restaurant, just like a movie theater, they are the highest duty or obligation under the law. I'm going to tell you what that means before you panic. Let's walk through it. You have an obligation to inspect your property. You have an obligation to proactively seek out potential harms. So that can be as simple as just walking around, and if you start seeing something big and heavy hanging and swinging from your ceiling, you deal with it. You have a shaky bookshelf in the children's classroom. Looks like it could fall over. You have a window that's, could fall over when someone's in the bathroom. Those are the types of things that we're talking about. If it is, put a cone up, wrap it. If you can't fix it right away, just be aware of it. Make sure that people can't go to that. That seems reasonable, right? Everyone does this already. You have an obligation to warn of or eliminate hazards. So those are kind of related. Again, if I walked in right over here and there's a hole in the ground and Matt just puts a rug over it, that's not okay. He has to put something there that says, hey, there's a hole. Don't walk this way. This entrance is closed. Again, this is pretty elementary. You have an obligation to avoid gross negligence. Think of gross negligence as conduct that is so reckless that it's just below an intentional act. Let's say there's a massive hole out in the parking lot, and Matt looks at it and says, you know what, I don't think just cover this up with tree branches. If a car can fit in there, that's gross negligence. Or let's say you are pulling up the church bus to go drop some people off at home, and you pull over into the carport going 70 miles an hour. That's gross negligence. It's just extreme reckless conduct. You have an obligation to protect an invitee, your members and guests, from a criminal act of a third party, but only if the criminal act is foreseeable. I know what you're thinking. How can you predict what a criminal is going to do? Well, I've been prosecuted for 2 years. I wish I knew. But you don't. However, this is slightly different. Let me give you a hypo. Let's say in the month of December, your church had 10 burglary for motor vehicles. You had 10 cars broken into out in your parking lot. Let's say that the month of January, you have a youth event that's coming up, and they're going to be gone for about a week, and you're going to have cars out in your parking lot for about, left alone unattended. Do you think it's foreseeable that one of those cars could be broken into?
Yes.
Exactly. So, let me give you another example of what is unforeseeable criminal activity. If I had driven up here this morning, everyone was in here, and I went around to this side door, and there was a doorbell, I don't think there is, and there was a doorbell there, but it wasn't working. And so I'm ringing the doorbell, well, y'all can't hear me because Matt should have fixed that. And a homeless guy runs through the parking lot and punches me and assaults me. Is that foreseeable criminal act of a third party? No, of course not. So you see what we're talking about here? Like, this is very, very nuanced. But if there has been crimes, if there has been some activity that would lead you to believe it's possible to happen again, you have to take steps to prevent that. What does that mean for you and your ministry? I don't know. I don't know what that means. Maybe it means putting more lights. Maybe it means parking closer to the building. There's things to consider. The next one, and I'm going to tie this all together, a trespasser. It is kind of the definition that you would think. They don't have the right to be on the property. You owe them a low level of duty. Really, the only thing that you can't do is have gross negligence. You can't booby trap your property hoping someone is not going to walk through, to prevent people from walking through. Can't do it. You also, there's a theory called attractive nuisance, and this is what's going to be scary for y'all. Attractive nuisance is a foreseeable inducement to a child who cannot or does not appreciate the harm of a potential risk. Let me give you a prime example. The way that these usually come up are swimming pools in the back of a house that don't have a fence around them. A child doesn't know and can't understand that they're going to fall in that pool and drown. However, it's attractive to them. They see the pool. They like the water. They've been in the pool with their floaties. How does that apply to a church? You don't have a swimming pool. No, you don't. What about playground? You have a playground out there. God forbid a kid gets on monkey bars, fall off, and breaks his neck. Did you have a fence around it? However, what if you had a fence around it and someone climbed the fence and got in? What do y'all think? It is a trespass. That's a criminal trespass. So if you have taken steps to prevent the harm, but harm still does occur, you're not going to be liable. You've done your steps to proactively seek out those harms and prevent against them. Now, let's say that same example. Let's say a kid does scale a fence, gets in, breaks his neck, and it happens again 2 weeks later. Now you kind of start seeing, hey, once I know that fence wasn't good enough, or that little hole, down in the corner, kids could get through it, I think, and I would argue to you that now you need to take a step to again prevent or fix, conceal, raise the fence, do something. You start to see how this is impacting your church. I know here at East Side, if you look at, I don't know where I am in the building, but they have their air conditioning units fenced in. Is that attractive to a kid? I know as a kid it was for me. So, something to think about. I know churches have fences, they have things that they want to tear down outside. So if you have a fence, if you're thinking about tearing it down, ask yourself, what's it protecting? What is it preventing a kid from wandering onto our property to do? So, just kind of food for thought. Okay, I'm going to transition yet again. Are there any questions about that section? Are y'all just scared silent now at this point? So. Okay, this is really why you're here. This is a church's obligation to its members, and this kind of piggybacks off what we just covered. You have 3 obligations under the law, as I mentioned. You have to use ordinary care. That's just a fancy word for saying you need to be reasonable. You need to protect your members and guests from foreseeable criminal acts of a third party. We're going to drill down into what each of these means right here. I'm going to change the slide, but it will. You will see right at the top is going to be the one that we're talking about. So, ordinary care, it's just a degree that you owe the people coming on your land. I kind of talked about that. In the law, it's called the reasonably prudent person. It's a legalese, but it's just a way to figure out and get in your mind and picture who is the most reasonable person and what would they do in these situations. This is going to come back into play later when we talk about volunteer security teams. So tuck that away and remember it because it is crucially important later. We've talked about this enough. Again, reasonably prudent person, how would they act? Church members and guests, they're invitees. Again, you owe them the highest duty under the law, the highest obligation under the law. So, again, I've already listed out what you need to be doing to protect them, so just remember that. This is really the one that we're going to talk about. Foreseeable criminal acts of third parties. So I gave you the BMV hypo, burglary of a motor vehicle hypo, but the courts have given us some factors to consider that I'm going to share with you. So again, this is the duty to protect your members and guests from foreseeable criminal acts. What is foreseeable? Well, a court has said these things. Whether any criminal conduct previously occurred on or near the property. So let's say, it's the break-ins aren't happening here, but they're happening on the 2 blocks surrounding your church. I think that's near. It's something enough for you to be put on alert. How recently the criminal conduct occurred. Is this something that happened 10 years ago or last month? That matters. So if it's brought to you and say, hey, 10 years ago, something happened at this house over here. That's probably far enough removed, but for you to be liable, but maybe something for you to consider moving forward. How often it occurred. How similar it was to the conduct at issue. So let me give you another example. If houses are being broken into over there, and cars are being broken into here, that's pretty similar. If cars are being broken into neighbors and someone is being assaulted here, I think that's different enough. That's not foreseeable. That's not the same type of harm that you would expect to see here. And here's one that's pretty, again, I think very interesting. What publicity was given to the previous conduct to indicate that the premise owners knew or should have known about it? So, again, this kind of wraps up these other things. If this is something happening on the other side of town, you may not know about it. If it's something that's kind of happening in your area of the community, you should be aware of it. Why is this so important to me? Church shootings. I think now, and I argue that they're foreseeable. Again, everyone knows about them. That's why every one of you is here today. So, let me just give you a couple of things. Between 1980 and 2005, there were 137 church shootings, and let me put a caveat there. These were only Christian places of worship. These are not mosques. These are not synagogues. These are evangelical places of worship. The majority of those did not have a fatality. However, between 2006 and 2016, 147 church shootings have occurred. So you can start to see now how that is increased. You're on alert. What is going on? I think now, you now have an obligation to protect your members and guests from this. The average annual number of church shootings has doubled in the last decade, which was backed up by the research. So, again, I think you're on alert now. It's foreseeable. So, again, that little section that we just talked about, are there any questions about that or anything else that we've covered thus far? I'm about to change gears yet again. No? Yeah.
So you were talking about the, just something being foreseeable and it being preventable, right? So with the church shootings, let's say that we take major steps and then somebody still somehow comes through the door. And is it enough to prove that you were working diligently to prevent it even though it wasn't preventable? Is that what would document that? Or?
Yeah. If you didn't understand, he said, what happens if a church shooting does occur and you have taken the steps to implement a security team or take the steps that would prevent it, but it still occurs? Would that be enough? I think it would. Really what a court is looking at here is if you're negligent property owner, if you're negligent in your conduct, your supervision, they're going to hold you responsible. As soon as you can start showing that, hey, look, we tried. We can't prevent everything from happening. A court is quick to look at and say, you did enough. You're not liable. And again, I want you to think and realize that the gravity and just how dirty it is that a church shooting can lead you as a church to pay for that conduct. It's awful. It's awful to think about. However, it's necessary as a leader. I want you to think about that in the back of your mind to help prevent it on the front end. So that's my purpose in saying this. That's a great question, but I think taking those steps is enough. So how to protect your church. This is really why you're here. Security teams. We're going to spend the rest of the time talking about this. There are really a couple of options here. You have a volunteer security team. This is the new law. We're going to talk about this a lot. That is giving this. Armed versus unarmed volunteer security teams. There's a distinction, and I'm going to make that later. Police or private security teams. So let's go through each one of those in depth. A volunteer security team. As of September 1st, 2017, just a few months ago, there were two key pieces of legislation that passed that now make this possible. Let me give you the story. There was the state representative from Irving that wrote this bill that is now a law, was at his church providing security for I think it was a holiday carnival. A lot of people there had guns, they had organized and coordinated and done everything necessary. However, at the end, he starts looking back and thinking, okay, how could we have made this better? And he starts looking into the law, and he realized everything that they had done was illegal. So, what he decided to do was write a bill, which is now the law, to say, we want to put more guns into churches. We want to make it easier. And the reason I say that is because Chapter 1702 of the Texas Occupations Code, that governs private security. So if you're going to think of that, that's your work for hire. You're going to pay a security firm to protect you. You're going to pay someone to be your bodyguard. That is a private security. So what this has done is made an exception to that. It is now given the church a way around having to pay the exorbitant fees, the exorbitant amounts of training. However, I'm going to tell you should still do it. So it's made this possible. However, that doesn't mean that it's necessarily a good thing to do. I'm going to put the entire law up here. This is the entire law, and I'm going to read it because I think it is important for you to hear it. You're probably never going to look this up again, so I can at least tell you you heard it once. And then we're going to break this down. So, section 1702.333, place of religious worship, certain volunteers. A, in this section, volunteer security services means services or activities that are, 1, regulated under this chapter, which I just said, private security, and 2, provided without compensation and remuneration. Remuneration is a fancy legal term for saying money owed for a past service. B, this chapter does not apply to a person who is providing volunteer security services on the premises of a church, a synagogue, or other established place of religious worship. C, while providing volunteer security services under subsection B, a person may not wear a uniform or a badge, 1, that contains the word security, or 2, this is the big one, gives the person the appearance of being a peace officer, personal protection officer, or a security officer. You can't look like you're giving security. You can't look like anything but a regular churchgoer. So let's walk through this. What does that mean? What does all of this mean? It's a brand new area of law. Again, September is when this took effect. So what does that mean? We don't have any judges really interpreting this. We haven't had a set of facts that has been litigated under this. So we're left with exactly what I just read you. So what I'm going to try to do is interpret this the best that I can, pulling in some other areas of the law to help you understand what that means. That statute was pretty anemic, would you agree? There's not a lot there. When you're looking at a piece of law, a statute, it's important to remember that you read statutes in context, not in isolation, much like Scripture. Don't pull one verse out of a passage and ignore the larger passage as a whole. So what can't you do? It was clear about a couple of things. So for your volunteer security team, this is applying to someone carrying a gun under this section. You cannot receive compensation or remuneration. You cannot accept gifts. Don't accept the bag of cookies that Sister Sue made you and said, thank you so much for doing this. This is a huge help. You better only accept a thank you if you are going to be in this. Think of this as an Olympian. Olympians can't be paid for their athletic services. Otherwise, you become a professional. I know they made exceptions, but just bear with me. So just consider this as you're an Olympian. If you're going to do it, you have to do it for free. Can't accept anything. Now, let me give you the side note, kind of the reality. If you accept a batch of cookies, somebody says thank you for that, are you going to lose your status? Probably not. But why risk it? Just say thanks, but no thanks. Unfortunately, I can't accept that. So that's one of the things you can't do. You can't wear anything with the word security on it or a badge. Just as a general matter, don't walk around with a badge. Don't ever do that. It's not smart. There's a law that says, impersonating a police officer, I prosecuted people under it. Don't do it. Just don't wear a badge. Period. End of story. A security shirt. We're going to talk more about having a shirt with security on it later. Is it going to be a good idea? I don't know, but there are some strategic ways in which it might be beneficial to an unarmed security team. I mentioned that there was, again, I hit on this. You can't give the appearance of being any type of law enforcement. I mentioned that there was another piece of legislation that came up, and what it says you can do. Actually, let me pause. What can you do under this statute? Do you have to be licensed to be armed? What do you think?
Yep.
Exactly. Because we know that because there are criminal statutes unlawful carry of a weapon, 4602 of the Texas Penal Code, that says you have to have a license to carry anywhere but your private property or your home or en route to your car. So, is a church your home? Is it en route to your car? Is it going to the gun range? Anything like that? No. Oh, Mr. Stidham, churches are private property. Great point. It's wonderful. However, I've already explained to you under the law why it's not private property. It's not treated like private property. People that come here are like invitees. It's like Walmart. You're treated just like Walmart under the law. You better have a license. Like I said, UCW 46.035, that's the UCW by an LTC carrier. So when you have your CHO, your LTC, and you actually go somewhere you shouldn't, you'll get that in your CHO class. I'm not going to go into that. The next piece of law that passed that really made this possible, like I mentioned, private security is incredibly expensive. It was laborious. It was hard to do. So, in the vein of putting more guns into churches, Senate Bill 16 dropped the application fee of a LTC from $140 to $40, and your renewal from $70 to $40. So what they have said, we want people in churches, yes, they need to be armed, we know this from everything on the screen, but we're going to make it easier. We're going to make it cheaper. We're going to make this something that is more affordable for everyone. So as of September 1st, if you have gone and applied, it would have been $40, regardless of what your business is there, $40. So that's a huge help. Let's talk about the pros of having this armed volunteer security team. It's free, in theory. We're going to talk about liability, again, attaching to having a volunteer security team. Your Barney Fives having guns in your church. We're going to talk about this. So in theory, it's free. It's made up of members of your church. This is a very important thing. They're familiar with the members. They know who comes. They know who belongs. Y'all come from smaller churches. You're very familiar with who's there regularly. They might identify a perpetrator or a suspect, maybe out in the parking lot, if you place these people at your door. Again, strategy and strategic, stuff is not my area of forte, so I'm just giving you a hypothetical. If you're placing people at the doors and they can see something going on in the parking lot, like, I've never seen this guy before, he's acting suspicious, maybe you can prevent something before. So the familiarity with the members and who belongs at the church, I say who belongs as members, who regulars. In a larger church, obviously this is much harder to do, but this was not designed for larger churches. This was designed for small churches to have some kind of protection. They know the pulse of the congregation. They know what's going on. The cons, you can't wear security or carry a badge. You just have to look like a regular church attendant. I would tell you, don't wear your black sunglasses, don't wear your little earpiece, don't look like anything but someone coming to church if you're going to do this. So, crucially important, because that's just one of the few things that the statute says you cannot do. Very explicit. Greater liability, almost unlimited. And let me just give you a hypo that I'm going to keep referring back to. Let's say, God forbid, you find yourself, your church has been breached by an active shooter. The worst thing happens, people are killed. As it gets ready to go to a trial, they find out the ballistics, all the expert, the forensic DNA, everything like that points to every person that got shot and died was shot by your security team. Came from the bullets of the people on your security team. And you go back and you start looking, okay, well, let's think about this. What happened? What did we do up front? Did we have an application process? Did you go to a shooting range with them? Did you ask them how long they've been licensed? No. That liability is unlimited. They'll clean you out. Again, this is a dark thing to talk about, to think about. That's the reality. That's how it would play out. So, we're going to talk again, kind of the steps that you should take, but it's almost unlimited. The liability you could face from a negligent act of an armed security guard. And let's say they didn't have a license, they didn't have an LTC. It's even worse, because now they're doing that, committing a crime. So think about those things. Think about who you're going to put in that church, if you are at all. When you put a security team in place, you're implying, if not just outright saying, they're qualified. Remember that. So here's some practical advice. Just because it's legal doesn't mean it's wise. It's not illegal for me to sit on my porch and flip a match off. However, if I burn my neighbor's house down, I'm responsible. So, think about that. Is it wise? Unlicensed security, like I said, I'm going to use a harsh word, it's asinine. Don't do it. If they don't have a gun, if they don't have a license, don't let them on your property. Period. End of story. This is something else to think about. By being an armed volunteer security guard on a church security team, you're agreeing to take a human life if necessary. That's a heavy weight. That's a weight that I have never had to carry. I was not an officer. I was not on the streets. But that's something that people need to remember, that if they're signing up for this to come carry a gun in your church, that's what it means. They will take someone's life if necessary. There's a couple other things I want to go through. Just practical advice. Who owns the property your church is meeting in? It matters. If the church owns it, if that entity owns it, you're okay. You don't have to clear it with anyone. What if you're meeting in a school? What if you're meeting in a public park? What about a government entity, a government-owned building? You need to ask. If that applies to one of you, it's important because the law will treat you differently. Again, why I can't just give general advice that will apply to each of you, it matters. So, if that applies to you, start thinking, okay, there's another step that I'm going to need to do. You're going to need written approval. It's just kind of one of the preliminary things, so just kind of keep that in your mind as something you have to do. An armed volunteer security team is incredibly risky. If you haven't heard me yet, hear that. It's risky. You need to contact the church's insurance provider prior to any implementation of this. I don't know if they have criteria. I know nothing about insurance. Insurance law, nothing. But it's something to be aware of. Do they have criteria for a security team? I can't imagine a church's security policy is just going to say, yeah, bring as many people as you want here with a gun. We're fine with it. Because we're on it too, you know? So, no, they're likely going to have criteria. They're probably going to have trainings. They're probably going to have, stuff they're going to have to do on your end before you can come back to them and say we're ready. The cost will likely increase. I just can't imagine premiums wouldn't go up. Failure to inform them prior to an implementation of putting armed people in your church will probably cancel your policy. Again, just thinking from a legal perspective, I can't imagine they don't have some clause in there that says that they're bringing guns into their church. Again, with no license, it's illegal. We're going to cancel their policy. So call them. If you're interested in doing this route, call them. Ask the questions. Better than on the front end. Coordinate with your local law enforcement. Call the people. I don't know how many officers are out here. Call the department. Try to schedule meetings with some of the higher-ups. Maybe it's an opportunity that multiple church leaders can come together to just do one meeting. But coordinate with them. Let them know what you're thinking about doing. Let them know, kind of know your plan. Ask their opinions. They probably have some thoughts and opinions of what you should do, how you should coordinate. Hey, maybe identify to us each of the people from your church that would be having a gun. So if we ever find ourselves at your church, we're aware of this. This is just kind of practical things to be thinking about. I mentioned earlier, not all LTC carriers are the same. Just because you have an LTC doesn't mean that you're Chris Kyle. They come in different shapes and sizes. Barney Five had a gun, so I keep using that example. You don't want Barney on your team. So you need to know how qualified someone is if you're going to do this. Do your research on them. Ask them questions. I say have an application. Make it formal. Again, so if you do get sued, you can come back and say, hey, look, here's everything we asked them. We did our work. Spend time with them at a gun range. Like I said, this is an exception to those licensing requirements of a private security team. My best advice to you is to mirror those as closely as possible. It's just smart. Because if the law has said, hey, this is what we require these private security teams to do to be okay with us, it's going to be okay for you. Conduct legal background checks. This is one of those things, and it kind of comes into what your question was earlier. People may not be convicted, but if someone's charged with murder, an aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, an assault family violence for being rough with their spouse, I think it's wise to put a gun in their hands. So I would even ask beyond that, have you ever been a party to a lawsuit? Because being charged with a crime, you're now a party to a lawsuit. So you kind of start thinking, wow, he's had 7 domestic violence cases dismissed against him. So ask the questions, get the information. Weapons training, what have they had? Is this the guy that just passed the LTC test and says, yeah, I'm qualified? No, you're not. You're not. You can hit a paper target from 20 feet away, good for you. What can you do in an active shooter? Have they gone through any training courses? Have they gone through these shooting courses that kind of make it more of a sport as opposed to just standing and shooting? Be creative. Think about these things. Think about what local gun ranges are offering, ways that you can train your people. And again, this can be just 1 or 2 people. It doesn't have to be many. You don't get a fleet of people standing at the back of your church with guns. I mean, what it comes down to is training, training, training. You have to train these people. If you're going to trust them to take a human life, train them. I mentioned earlier that the standard with which people are viewed, basically your obligation that the court will impose on you, matters. Why does it matter? If you are acting like a professional, professionals are not held to that reasonably prudent person standard. If so, doctors would be held to a standard of what average Joe would do. That's obviously not what we want. We as a society want, these standards to be elevated. So, if you're dealing with professionals, a doctor will be held to the reasonably prudent person of a doctor in a similar circumstance. Why does this matter for your volunteer security team? They're going to be treated like police in a court of law. If something goes down, they will be treated like an officer. Let that sink in. Why does that matter? And let me play this out for you in a case. They're going to bring their expert witness up. It's going to be someone who trains police officers. And they're going to ask them, hey, what do you train your people to do? And he's going to tell you. It could be something as simple as their answer being, I never would train someone to do that. No reasonable officer would ever pull the trigger in that circumstance. Okay, pass the witness. Go on. That's how it's going to play out. So they're going to be held to the standard of a police officer. The more training, the better qualified, the better off your church will be. And you're kind of starting to see this isn't maybe the best route to take. It's an option, but there's a lot of work that has to be done. I mentioned unarmed volunteer security teams, and I use that term. If they're unarmed, this does not apply to them. If you are unarmed, let's just think of it. You have a group of 4 men that sit at the front to keep someone from rushing up on the stage to attack your pastor. They're just volunteering. They're just trying to provide protection. So, if you think about this, unarmed team, just a coordinated effort of your members is an unarmed volunteer security team. They can wear security on their shirt. Do I recommend it? No, probably not, but having someone in a parking lot with a security shirt might be enough of a deterrent to keep someone from thinking, hey, they're completely vulnerable. It's just a thought. Again, don't put a badge with anyone, don't do anything like that. But strategically, that may matter. That may be a great question for Jeff. I don't know. But it's just something for y'all to think about. Police, on or off duty, this is an option. Now again, I know that this is not a reality for everyone. However, for some of you it may be, so that's why I tell you. Again, they're highly trained. You know what a cop is. They're the industry standard, remember that. If they're off duty, if a crisis breaks out or something, now they're an on-duty officer. I'm going to argue to you that church liability is cut off and it's now on the police department. So from a liability perspective, it makes sense. It's expensive. I know this. It can't be done by everyone, but it may be worth looking into. It may be worth asking the police if you haven't done it already, hey, can you come for a couple hours on a Sunday? I don't know what the constraints on law enforcement will be, but it's a thought. Private security teams, this to me really just isn't an option. Private security teams are going to cost as much, if not more, than a police officer. There is still a lot of hoops to jump through just to have private security come out to your church. So it's an option. I make you aware of it, but I don't think it's a reality for you. That is what it is. And before I do this, you do have another option, not having a security team. I think it's foolish. I think, again, from what I've said, the foreseeability, the duty, and the obligation you now have to protect your members, you can't go without something. You need something in place. Now, it doesn't have to be a bunch of people carrying guns, but something needs to be done. Some coordinated effort on your part. I'm going to stop here. This was a ton of stuff. I have one other section that I can go through really quickly. It's just how to keep the guns out of your church if you're interested. Any questions from that whatsoever? Again, I know we're going breakneck speed, but yes?
I have a question. Say your church decides to go with the unarmed security team and an active shooter comes in and kills people, would the church be held liable for not having an armed security team?
I can't answer that. I mean, that's going to be a very fact, I'm going to need the facts of what actually happened. Again, is your church a church with, 15 people in it? Is that really a reality for some people? Do they have several hundred people? Do you have police members that are members of your church? It's going to start looking at that type of information. Again, an unarmed security team by no means will prevent, and if an active shooter breaks out, I mean, arguably everyone's unarmed. So I don't know what to tell you in that case, but I just don't know. It's tough. So again, this is a brand new law. I don't know how it's going to apply. I don't know how it's going to be worked out under the law, but it's a great thing to be thinking about. Are we actually going to be protected?
Legally liable with the church, I was just thinking of the legality of it.
Yeah, there's a strong argument it will. There's a very strong argument. But again, what have you done? How have you trained those people? Have you trained them in active shooter protocol? If you have, I think that starts lessening that liability. Maybe they don't have a gun on, but again, they know who to call when something happens. There's a plan in place. And again, I think what is important for you to remember and know is that plan is crucial to how a court would view this. So the more robust that plan is, the better off you're going to be. So, any other questions?
Yes.
Let me get this right. Yes, sir.
So we're talking about need a team and so on. It could be interesting canvassing the church to see who would be interested. I mean, there's one approach like, we're going to have a potluck and decide who's going to be on the security team. Well,
Sure.
already that day is done and you can't unpaddle out of that. What is your suggestion for communicating the possibility of having a team armed or unarmed without creating rumors that say we've got a cannon at the front door for anybody who comes in looking bad?
Sure. You're going to know the pulse of your congregation. The lead pastor may not, but what about the elders? What about people in small group? What about the deacons? Hey, Brother Bob has 400 guns at his house. He probably likes guns. This may be something of interest to him. So start with that. Again, I don't see anything wrong with making an announcement, but like you said, it's hard to paddle out of, and you're gonna bring the riffraff in, the people that have no business with a gun. So my best advice would be to use kind of the pulse and use the people in your church to see who you know that would maybe even have an LTC, and just start with that. And if not, I think it's a very grassroots type approach. Just ask around and see what comes back. Nothing comes back, maybe at that time you start thinking, hey, maybe if our church has small groups, or maybe on a Wednesday night service or Sunday night when it's a smaller group, we're going to ask some people then. It's a great question. Great question. Yes.
I was just going to say, could it be beneficial when kind of documenting that you have a plan, like to more towards her question, to also document kind of your reasoning for why you chose not to have a security team, and document, hey, we looked at the regulations and we felt that maybe there was added liability or that it may not have been the safest route. Would that help from a liability standpoint?
Yeah, it absolutely would. Documentation is key. And again, the hypo I gave you earlier, a church is now potentially liability for something that happened 20 years ago. Anyone remembers what was going on at church 20 years ago? In 1998, I was 10. I don't know what the heck was going on back then. So, the more documentation you have, the more thoughts of your reasoning, recording the minutes of your meetings, things like that, are always going to be good for someone to look at and say, I understand why. Again, like I said, an armed volunteer security team is not an option for everyone, but you need to at least have a plan, which goes to your question. You need to have some strategy. Any other questions? Is that a question or you just waiting? Okay. All right, we're going to move on. This is going to be really quick. This is the 30.6 and 30.7 statutes. I'm going to put this up on here. If you're taking notes, literally just write that 30.06 and 30.07. This is how you're going to keep guns out of your church if you say, I don't want anyone coming in my church with a gun. So, this 30.6, anyone that carries a concealed handgun on property of another without effective consent. Does this apply to your volunteer security team? I already gave you the answer. No. Why? They have consent. So this is an option for you if you want to actually put this team in place of keeping other members, people not on the security team, from not having a gun and allowing your security team to still carry a gun. Just kind of a little workaround that, again, could be an option for you. This is the entire statute. The only thing that you really need to know is when you write your statute, these are the words that absolutely have to be there, punctuation has to be there, everything has to be there verbatim. Now, it gives you a couple of ways in which the letters have to appear, but like I said, if you just write down that statute, it's very clear when you go to look at it what has to be there. 30-7, this applies to LTC, to an open carry. 30-6 applies to concealed, this applies to open. And again, it prohibits carrying of an open weapon on property. Does this apply, or, I already gave the answer. It doesn't apply to your volunteer security team. Why? That's the overwhelming answer. It's a trick question. If you're on a volunteer security team, you can't get the appearance of an officer. Your gun is hidden. Period. End of story. So, it's still kind of the same thing. Those that have a gun will have permission, but if you're on that armed volunteer security team, it can't be visible. Has to be hidden and concealed. Yes, sir?
Okay, just out of curiosity, isn't the open carry and the concealed carry the same thing?
No, they're not. I'm going to show you why. That's a great question. I thought that before I started looking into this. They're different. Here's the statute again. It's almost the same thing. This is what you'd have to post. This point 3 is the reason why. I'm going to read it to you. Every sign that you post for the LTC, the open carry under 30-7, is displayed in a conspicuous manner, clearly visible to the public at each entrance of the property. Every entrance. Let's go back and look at 30-6. Clearly visible to the public. They have gone a step further and said if you want to keep open carry on, you have to post it everywhere. That's why I think it's different. So if you're going to take the steps under it, put it at every door regardless. But under 30-7, you're required.
Okay, you said upon the entrance of the property, and then you just said door. So are you talking about the building, or are you talking about the parking lot?
I want to ask you, where do you want to keep the guns? If you want to keep them...
No, I'm talking about the sign, the posting.
That's what I'm asking you. If you put it at your driveway, it can't come onto the property.
Okay.
If it's at the door,
Okay.
again, premise really applies to just the building. Think brick and mortar. But if you want to stop them from even bringing it on church property, put it at the driveway.
I'm just asking.
Yeah, it's a great question.
An example of that is, like in Lubbock, on the university campus, on Texas Tech, at the entrance of every campus, there's a 30-7 sign.
Yeah.
But there's no 30-6 signs except for like on the hospital, and then, in those specific, there's only like 4 or 5 buildings that have 30-6 specific, but the entire campus is 30-7.
Yeah, so it's just a strategy question. And again, go ahead.
Just to clarify that, you can post one without posting the other.
Absolutely.
So if you want people to be able to concealed carry on your property, you just don't want open carry, post the 30-7, and that does that. You can, anybody that wants to can still concealed carry. They're still good. If you post 30-6, nothing.
Correct.
30-7 can get it orally to them when they come in, they have to comply or otherwise.
If they're concealed, you're not going to know. But yeah, however, under the law, you either have to give them a card with that, or you have to have a sign. So my recommendation is, yeah, you can just tell everyone, hey, we don't allow that, but just go ahead and put a sign up as well. So, especially open carry is obviously easier to spot, but again, it's just another area of protection for you. Liability. Are they probably going to turn around and go back to the car? Yeah, but what if they don't? You were protected with the sign. Just kind of look at it. Any other questions? This is really the end of my presentation. Again, I went at breakneck speed. There's a lot of stuff out there. Yes, sir.
Does that include doors that are not unlocked during normal operating hours?
It's a great question. I think if people aren't coming in, it still doesn't matter. It says at each entrance. So if there's a door, I would still put it up there, just to be safe. Any other questions? And again, I'm going to be here till the end, so you can come find me in a break or something. All right. Thank you so much for your attention. Sorry to scare you, but I hope this has been helpful for you.